Quick question. What are the best kits you can possibly get? Answer's pretty simple. One's for free. Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/44 scale U.S. Marine Corps AAVP7A1. The model that you see here is built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, like I often in these videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35 scale and 1/6 scale. This model here being 1/44 is definitely outside of that normal purview. However, if anyone is interested in the models and the scales that I do work in, I can be reached at the following email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. If there was ever a model that I built out of the box, it's definitely this one. This model here is built strictly out of the box, and we'll be going over the model in this video by giving it a thorough in-box review, as well as I'm also going to be going over some aspects of the build to watch out for, as well as also to just make the build experience go by a little bit easier. So with that in mind, stay tuned because we have a little bit of content coming right at you. To start this video off, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around this model. And this vehicle here is the U.S. Marine Corps AAVP7A1. This is a very interesting vehicle and is exclusively a vehicle utilized by the U.S. Marine Corps. This vehicle here was the latest in a long line of amphibious tractors which was first adopted by the U.S. Marines in the late 1930s and the early 1940s timeframe. Those LVTs saw service to great effect during World War II in the Pacific Theater and were also briefly used in the Atlantic, but that's another story. Regardless, after the war, the Marines saw the usefulness of this type of vehicle and they kept on improving and coming up with newer vehicles to fulfill the same role. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. Marines utilized the LVT-5, and then that was eventually phased out and replaced in the late 70s, early 80s with the LVT-7. The LVT-7 has been in constant service with the U.S. Marine Corps ever since. Although, over the years, several upgrades and modifications were added to this vehicle just to keep it up to date and to prolong its service life. This vehicle here reflects many of these upgrades that were added to the vehicle. Such would be the addition of a bow plane, the slat armor on the sides, as well as also a new turret that featured both a M2HB as well as the automatic grenade launcher. Outside those upgrades, the base vehicle itself is basically exactly how it was back in the 80s when these things first entered into serious service. The vehicles are very similar to the Army's Bradley, where they're utilizing ballistic-grade aluminum for the hull construction. For this vehicle here, it's definitely important because the thing needs to float. And also, the vehicle utilizes the Bradley suspension. The sprocket, the track, the idler, and the running gear are all lifted directly from the Bradley. Of course, the one task that this can do that the Bradley can't do as well or well at all is that this thing is designed to swim. So that's why it has that interesting boat-like shape to the hull. And also, you will see that this vehicle utilizes for water propulsion water jets. This was very different compared to the predecessor vehicles being both the LVT-4 and the LVT-5. Outside of U.S. Marine Corps use, the vehicle was exported and is utilized by several other countries around the world today. Before we go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when this model was first started in order to get a good idea of what the base starter kit supplies you with. And here's the model at the start of the build, or at least it's underneath this carton here. You see, this model here is unique because I didn't buy this one. It just sort of materialized in my P.O. box. So I'm not sure if this was a gift from a viewer out there or if it's a gift from one of my vendors. There's no literature or anything to go with it. I never got an email or nothing, and it's completely a mystery to me. But if this is, and you are the individual who sent this and you're watching this video, thank you. I definitely appreciate that. And so let's go ahead and examine what exactly this is. Well, quite simply put, it is a 1/44 scale Trumpeter U.S. Marine Corps AAV7A1 model kit. Obviously, this model here is very different of a subject matter as I typically work on, specifically with the scales that we have here. Generally, the smallest I ever work in is 172, and even that is a once-in-a-blue-moon type of affair. Even though I have done 148s from time to time, generally 135 is my floor. So with this fella here being 144, this was something that I had to look up as I don't really follow this scale, and this was something that, again, was a bit of a mystery. So After looking online, it appears that these kits here were released by Trumpeter back in 2005. So they're not a vintage kit, but they're definitely a older tooling model at this point. And with the way the graphic design is on the box, it definitely leads me to believe that that makes sense and checks out, because this baseball uniform type design here was generally what was seen on Trumpeter kits of this era. And it actually does make sense that this kit here came out in 2005, because at this time, Trumpeter was really blowing up in popularity. The company was really the new, bright, shiny new kid on the block, and they did have a lot of new, exciting kits at the time that were working well for them. In 1/35 scale specifically, they were primarily doing a lot of stuff with modern AFV. So they had a line of M1 Abrams kits, they had a line of T55s, they did the S-Tank around this period. So they really were doing some really interesting and innovative products. And they were also branching out. Eventually they would branch out to World War II and in other scales even, like 1/16 that they are actually known for today. But it doesn't surprise me that they also went smaller, because I know that they did a line of stuff in 1/72, and obviously we have here a lineup in 1/144. The 1/144 tank market is a kit line that's been around for a little while now. They were really popular for war gamers for reasons that should be pretty obvious. These models are very small, you can have a large number of them, and they are relatively affordable. And the models that apparently that Trumpeter came up with in this range are some of the variants of the AAVP7A1. This one here is the version with the EAAK armor on the sides, but apparently they also have other variants of the same vehicle, but without the armor, and probably the older version with the 50 caliber exclusive turret, and not the version with both the 50 and also the grenade launcher. This here is kit number 00105, and that's really all there is to say about that. I don't really know all that much about this kit's background, other than the information I just stated. I believe that these kits are somewhat affordable. They retail, if I was to take a guess, anywhere between $5 or $10 US. So again, you could probably find them for cheap online, and they are more than likely very plentiful because Trumpeter kits are pretty prolific. Starting with the box art, there is none. So there's that going. We do have some graphic design though, and this is typical for, again, Trumpeter vehicles of this era, where we have the, what I call the baseball pinstripe type look. We have the vehicle's name right over there, and whoever did this layout never must have taken a class in graphic design, because it's really hard to read the letters, specifically right over there, because of the vertical lines. But regardless, it still gets the job done just fine. Instead of a box art, we have just a window of the model's components, and as you can see, this is a extremely simplistic model kit, which we'll be going over once I crack the box open. As for the remainder of the graphic design, we have a pretty Tamiya-ish color thumbnail of the vehicle fully painted on the side, front, back, side, left side, side, right side, and also the top, which of course is going to be helpful when it comes time for painting it. And on this side here, we just have some corporate info. On the back, no space has been left to waste on this kit, because we have here the instructions, and obviously, as one can clearly see, it is going to be a ridiculously quick and easy build. All right, cracking the model open. It has a very, retail type packaging to it. This is the type of thing you would expect to see for like things such as earbuds or something along those lines. Not so much for a plastic model kit, but that's a bit unique. The window is an actual window. It's not the plastic bubble, so that's also something to point out. And we do have a little bit more graphic design of a cool little black and white schematic of the AAVP7A1. That's nice. Okay, so the first thing that came out are the instructions, or I'm sorry, the decal sheet. Decal sheet is your typical blue paper Wurslide decals, and from what I've seen with other Trumpeter kits of the past, they should be perfectly fine. And the rest of the kit here is in this little taped up blister pack. I believe there's a piece of tape here that I just can't see. Let's go ahead and... Ooh. Does that open? I don't know. One have not guessed yet. This is literally my first time opening one of these. Ah, there's the tape right there on the sides. Alright, cool. Alright, and of course I screwed that up. Okay, so now that everything is on the table, which before was nice and neatly shipped from the company and must have been there for God knows how long, is now all over the place because I botched up the opening. Regardless, we'll still muscle through. So one of the biggest components here is the lower hull, which is a one-piece single molding. We have the cool shape of the AAV7, and we have the ramp, which is molded in the up position. Obviously, there's no interior detailing to be had on this example over here, and if this is something that you're into, you're going to have to make some modifications. The next thing is the upper body, which again is a single molding, and what's cool is they also went ahead and molded on basically all of the fittings, such as the armor plates that are affixed to the sides, and also the crew storage racks, which admittedly on the real one, these are all hollow, and on the kit one here, they went ahead and just molded them plastic. Again, with this type of scale and with this type of media, this is the best way to do it. Otherwise, the only other way to do it is with photo etch, which obviously this kit will not give you. The other details are all integrally molded on the top, such as the armor plates found on those two large elongated hatches that are on the rear area. And we also have the driver and the other crewman hatch in the closed state. The grill work looks to be nicely rendered, as are the distinctive non-slip little tile things, or it's like a giant piece of diamond plate really, but they're just integrally found onto the top portion of the AAV7. One thing that is not present is the exhaust manifold, or I should say the large exhaust manifold. We have the small one right over there. And this is something that's noteworthy because Trumpeter actually went ahead and released a 1/35th scale counterpart of this, which is an interesting kit in its own because it's a copy off of a Tamiya, and then it was a WSN release, which is Trumpeter. But regardless, that kit was giving you all these components that we have here, and one of the somewhat, you could say, errors was the addition, or I should say just the presence of the little exhaust as opposed to the larger one, which from what I've seen on many AAV7s with the EAK, it would have that larger exhaust manifold. Now, I may be mistaken. The AAV7 is not exactly a vehicle that I'm all that familiar with. If any leathernecks out there who are watching this and are about to rage on the comment section, feel free to correct me if I am indeed mistaken. Because I have seen on a number of these vehicles, it has the larger pattern of exhaust manifold. If it's, I believe, a smoke generator, if I'm not mistaken. But if I am, you know where the comment section is. On the inside, there's just some information about the mold number and also the vehicle type and the scale. Not really that important info. The next thing takes us to the suspension. And on this one here, this model utilizes a single molding for the tracks, the wheels, the sprockets, and even the swing arms, which for a model of this scale is perfectly fine, because if this was Lincoln length, this thing would have never seen the light of day. The detailing on these parts here are very nicely done. It has little guide horns present. The sprocket is nice and clearly rendered. I believe it even has the mud slits. Nope, it's just the thinness of the plastic. Scratch that. Hopefully this comes out into focus, but you can see the little details present for the fasteners on the road wheels, and even the track is extremely nicely rendered with the rubber pads and the link detailing all present with something that's this small. So excellent quality indeed. Of course, being molded in one piece, installation is going to be an absolute breeze, and this is something I'm probably going to circle back on when it comes time for actual painting. The next things I see here are the sponsons, which is funny that this one actually has sponsons, again, for something this tiny. We do have the little blister on the back for what is, I believe, the water jets, but, you know, it's there. Decently rendered regardless. This is the dive plane, or the bow plane, I should say. It's not a dive plane. Dive plane would be if it's a submarine. This is the bow plane, which is something that was present on the AAVs that were modernized in the late 80s, early 90s time frame, I want to say. But it stuck with this system all the way up until the end of this vehicle's service life. I'm not sure if it could be rendered in the open or the closed format, or if it's something that you have to pick. We'll see how that pans out. This here is just a little plug in order to secure the turret to the roof and to ensure that the turret can rotate. And speaking of which, here we have the turret right here. Again, nicely rendered with all of its detailing. All of the periscope details are integrally molded on. That's going to be fun to paint. The grenade launcher is there. What's absent is the chute, which sticks out of the side, or at least it does on the Tamiya ones. But it's, you know, it's a nice detailed piece regardless. It is also missing the smoke grenade launchers, but again, LOL 144 scale, so, you know, it should be fine for the purposes of this build anyhow. And the last thing we have here is the front area. Is the front area of the AAV. So that little front plate right there. Hopefully it comes out in focus. It's kind of hard to do, but we have the headlights integrally molded on, as well as the provisions for the bow plane. And that's it. So, let's go ahead and get this one to the shop. As I mentioned before, this is a ridiculously easy model to put together, and at this point here, it's actually ready for painting. However, there's one or two things I want to go over just before the model heads off into the next leg of its construction. So as I mentioned earlier, the hull is comprising of several components that assemble in order to give you the completed shape that we have here. Well, one thing that I noticed was that if you build it out of the box in this configuration, you try to paint it, although obviously you can do that, it is going to lead to some complications due to the suspension here, as trying to get in here to thoroughly paint everything is going to be fairly difficult, which shouldn't be a surprise for anyone who watches my videos. Obviously, tanks have a lot of little nooks and crannies in these sections over here, and trying to paint them with this little side skirt in the way can be a bit problematic. So on this model over here, I basically lifted a technique that I was messing around with on the 172 Eschi builds that I've touched upon in the past, and that is with not gluing the tracks on at this time. And as you can see, the entire unit just pops off as one continuous unit. Although unlike the Eschi builds where you have to go ahead and do the individual link and link tracks to get to this point over here, for this build that's thankfully not the case, as I touched upon before, as it's just one self-contained unit. So what I went ahead and did was, in order to modify the model to have this type of a format, I needed to alter the front stems over here where the sprockets plug into. On the back portion, you can see what the original stem height looked like, and this was something that I went ahead and removed a little bit of material off of, just so that I could go ahead and install the tracks after the model is fully assembled, for basically the same reasons that I touched upon. With the way the kit is designed, the stems emerge from the side portion over here, and they plug on very well onto the tracks, and everything basically fits extremely well out of the box. So the kit is very, very nicely engineered in that respect. However, because the stem protrudes so much, you can't just snap the track on like I did just now once everything is fully assembled. Thus, there goes the dilemma. So what I went ahead and did was, on the front ones, I removed a little bit of material with a needle file. Not a whole lot, just about half the material that you can see if you compare it to the one on the back. This allows me to assemble the model like this, and then I could just drop the suspension into place when the time comes towards the tail end of the build. This is basically the equivalent of having your cake and eating it too. I could go ahead and thoroughly paint and weather everything, and then install it without any problems, giving it for a nice, thoroughly painted type affair. Also, one other thing I want to mention is that the model is basically seamless with the exception of the front section over here. This is really where all of the points conjoin, much along the lines of the United States map where you have those 4 states that intersect right over there. Well, this is basically where all of that conjoins on this model. And unfortunately, it's in a pretty visible location. Luckily, the seams are very easily dealt with, and the seam work is also very, very tight, so it's just some minor polishing in this area over here is all that's required. This was done with just some super glue and some sandpaper. Once the model was glued together, I took a little bead of super glue, added on the appropriate locations where the seams were present, waited for them to thoroughly set, and then I just polished it down with just some fine sandpaper. Obviously, the bow plane here was secured on after the bodywork was all concluded. It's also because of the bodywork in this section over here is why I opted to have the suspension get installed after the model is fully assembled and also painted, because trying to do the bodywork in this area over here with the tracks installed and even painted in some cases is definitely something that's less than ideal. You are in a really close proximity to where the sandpaper is going to be running up and down these sections over here, and obviously with these tracks fitted in these areas, it's going to potentially lead to some problems. So best to do is to avoid that altogether by making the quick little modification that I just touched upon. Now, even though I made the modification, the trick with the mod is that you want to remove just enough material for the sprocket to clear this area over here, but not too much where there's no more peg left and the piece is just floating around aimlessly, and you need to have a little bit more difficulty with the alignment. You have to have some kind of a indexing point for the sprocket to plug into. Otherwise, this may lead to some other issues, none of which are ideal. Fortunately, trying to gauge how much material needs to be removed is not a hard one, and it's basically just done by feel. You just need, as I could focus in on here, just a little bit of material found emerging from the final drives, which is more than enough for the sprocket to index and click in place, but it's enough for the whole track itself to be removed as a single unit when desired. With the model fully completed, let's go ahead and take a look at the suspension now in its final form. So if I hold the model up, you'll see that the suspension is thoroughly painted for the same reasons that I mentioned before. With the units being separately painted, this really streamlines and simplifies the build immensely. Trying to get in here and paint everything thoroughly, if it's all fully built, is definitely not going to be very fun. On the suspension itself, you'll see that everything is appropriately painted, which would include the center portions of all the wheels, the sprocket, the idler, and you can also see the other fine paintwork. For instance, on the rear idler wheel, these are steel rimmed on the real vehicle, so I went ahead and carefully mimicked that with the weathering technique. The application of the paint on these components was all done with the paintbrush, as well was most of the paintwork found on the remainder of the model. But for the wheels specifically, the way I painted them was I first spray painted them with flat black. Of course, this acts as a primer, but in this application over here, the flat black is actually what's used to paint the rubber tires. It's all done in one fell swoop. The green work that you see here was applied with the paintbrush and was carefully and meticulously painted so that when the paint is applied, it's only on the center portions and it's not found on the rubber tires. Trying to paint rubber tires this tiny? Yeah, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. So it's basically you do an inverse type painting technique. The tracks are painted my usual format, as I mentioned, on these post-World War II and even World War II American vehicles, where on the LVT over here, or I should say the AAV over here, the tracks are the same ones found on the Bradley, so you will weather them in the exact same format. The tracks themselves have a steel body, rubber pad found on the center, then there are also some rubber pads found on the inside, although trying to paint all that in the scale is quite difficult, specifically on the interior, but if you're just careful with your paintwork when you're applying the rust color, you should be able to navigate quite well. For the outer portions, these are easily painted again with the paintbrush with a little swipe of Tamiya rubber black, and that was applied to the locations there, giving you for the look that you see here. I hate to beat on a dead horse, but this is again why you want to go ahead and paint these separately, because as you can see over here on the underside portion where we have this side skirt, you're not exactly going to be able to get a paintbrush in there, and if you are looking at the model, yep, you will see certain angles where that section will most definitely come out, and it'll be one of those things that'll just bug the ever-loving hell out of you. So paint it off the model, and you'll be thanking me in the long run. On that note, we have here the front section. As I mentioned before, the kit was, pretty well engineered, but there was some seam work found in this area over here. And with the seam work polished away, again, leaves for a nice, perfect, seamless appearance. The last thing I want to mention about the construction involves the turret. The turret is fully rotatable, which is great, and it is on in a permanent manner in which that the turret sits onto the upper hull, and then a plug gets glued on underneath, and it holds it in place. Obviously, this is something you want to take some care with. You want to use just the right amount of glue where the piece is firmly and permanently glued in place, but not too much where it can seep out and, now you have a turret that's not operable. So that is something that you want to pay attention to. On similar lines, you want to do the same thing with the suspension, where when you're gluing it in place, you just want to use just the right amount of glue where you can pop the unit in place. The glues will set, hold everything where it needs to be. However, there's not too much glue where it can ooze out of the seams, or possibly when you're trying to, find that sweet spot, you can, drag the part on a place where you don't want it, and now you have an extra glue mark to contend with. So just, use a fine amount of glue on this one. It's a very small model, so we'll use an equally fine and small amount of glue. Outside of that, the build was basically, completely one of the easiest builds I've ever done in my life. And that's literally all there is to the construction aspect. And this takes us to the paintwork. And this model is nothing more than an exercise in paintwork. So obviously the model is painted in a 3-tone tricolored NATO camouflage scheme, which is more than appropriate for this vehicle. The camouflage, or I should say the model, of course, was first primed with flat black spray paint, and then I went ahead and applied the base coat with the airbrush. The base coat is Tamiya NATO green, and the other camouflage colors are, of course, the NATO tricolor. However, unlike the other models that are painted in a similar format found on this channel, where I utilize an airbrush for the camouflage application, for this one here, because of its really tiny small scale, that was not going to be an option. So the camouflage pattern that you see on this model is all applied by hand with the paintbrush. This has some great advantages where it's very precise, and I can go ahead and apply the camo in just the right locations where it needs to be. For the guide of painting the tricolor on one of these AAVs, fortunately there are lots of resources out there on the internet, so trying to find reference pictures was not hard at all. The paintbrush application of the camo is just like I also reference in my Merc schemes and some of my other models that I utilize a similar system, where the number one thing that the builder needs to pay attention to is paint consistency. This will make or break a paint job applied camouflage pattern. The color, or I should say the paint, needs to be at just the right consistency, where if it's too thick, it's going to be chunky and it's going to have brush strokes, and a 1/44 scale is really going to kill you. Or if it's on the opposite end, it's just going to run all over the place, and now you effectively have a wash. Neither of which are ideal, so you want to have that nice balance on the two. If you go ahead and have the balance of the paint mixed properly, it will just apply without any sort of problems. And because of the small scale, the paint application was done in practically no time. I think I had the whole camouflage pattern wrapped in about like 2 minutes, if that. It was ridiculously quick. It really was. The remainder of the paint work was actually done with the airbrush. So I was still able to do the counter shading and the filtering and the washing with the airbrush, bring it up to the condition that we have here. The other thing that this model did have was the use of some dry brushing for the paint chips and the edging that is typically seen on my builds. But probably your best friend for a model like this is the Tamiya panel line accent. That stuff is awesome. I absolutely love using it on my other builds, but on this one here, it really came in handy. Just with the nature of this model, with the applicate armor on the sides with that corrugated effect. It's very similar to the Bob Semple type tank. And on that build, I said the same thing. The Tamiya panel line accent will be your best friend. It will go into all these little nooks and crannies that we have here on the top, on the grill work, specifically on the armor, and it will just make everything pop out, and it'll just look so much better if utilized. On the armor, you can see all the little fastener locations that are molded in. We have these segments that are molded in, and the Tamiya panel line accent will just be a match made in heaven for this model over here. Apply with the paintbrush, and, this is basically the end result of what you'll get. After the paint and the weathering work was done, it was then time to add the markings. The markings are the kit-supplied water slide decals, and as you would imagine, for a 1/44 scale, the decals are microscopic. But they are excellent in quality, despite their small scale. In fact, these are probably the smallest decals I've ever applied on any plastic model before that I've done in the past. And I've done a few, and this one here, it definitely is memorable in that regard. The decals are applied to this model. They are in a black type font, which is, is more than appropriate. And just like on the real one, they kind of blend into the camouflage pattern. A lot of the markings are found on the NATO black areas, and so they just sort of kind of blend in. There's one right here on the front, on this corner section. I believe there's another one right here underneath the tail light, right over there. Regardless, the decal is the same quality of decal printings found on the other Trumpeter kits, which, needless to say, is excellent. They went out without any sort of problems. And then after the decals were applied, the entire model was thoroughly coated with BMS matte varnish, leaving for the end result that you see here. However, that's not the end of the paint work. As I often reference in my build videos, I also like to paint the smaller little fittings, and these are the type of things that a lot of people tend to neglect and miss on their builds, which is funny because it actually hurts to look, and the detailing is literally right there. The only thing you have to do is just finish it. And this would include things like the periscopes. And on this vehicle here, you can see that despite its small scale, the periscopes are painted. For my periscopes, I like to paint them in gloss black for the reasons that I've mentioned in many other videos, but you can see I went ahead and carefully applied them here. On this build, because of the smaller scale and the very small margin of error, you want to use a very, very, very precise paintbrush for this. So this is the type of thing where you want to have one of your brand new brushes, one of the best thin brushes that you possibly have in order to do this application. With a little bit of patience, I was able to apply the gloss black in the various locations, leaving for the end result that you see here. In addition to the periscopes, the same was also done to the headlights, right here on the front. And the same was also done to the taillights found on the back. Now, with this small scale, the taillights do not have the actual lenses integrally molded on, just the little brush guard that we have there. So a little drop of gloss red was all that was needed in order to complete the model to the look that you see here. One other thing I want to mention about the headlights is that generally with these pattern headlights, we have a white light and a blackout light. However, in this one, you see I went ahead and painted them both silver, and this was as per a real U.S. Marine Corps AAV that I was using as reference. While we're on the topic of small painted fittings, this brings us to the bump stops that we have right here on the rear crew doors. On the top sections, there is a rubber pad that is found on the real vehicle. The rubber pad detailing is integrally molded into this small kit, so the only thing you gotta do is put a swipe it to me a rubber black and just paint these sections right there and there. This here, you'll see the fuel filler cap, as I often weather on these models, gives the model a bit more extra character by adding the spillage and would definitely not be unseen on the real vehicle. Another small bit of detailing that someone can easily overlook is the spare track link, which is found on either side here of the rear of the vehicle. These were, again, very carefully painted in the format that you see here, giving the model a little bit of extra color pop. The final bit of detailing to reference is with the exhaust manifold, which would be right here on the AAV, and I added a little bit of exhaust sit there done with the airbrush. Of course, the weapons are painted as well. We have the M2 and the grenade launcher right next to it. A little swipe of paint, really all that was necessary. And at the end of the day, there's really nothing much more I could ever wanted out of a tank build. This thing was ticking all the boxes that you would want. It was easy to build, it went together without any sort of frustrations, and the model just turned out to be a nicely detailed and overall pretty decent piece. I always did like the U.S. Marine Corps AAV platform. It was a really cool vehicle, and I do have several in the stash that I want to get to. So having got to this one here, definitely, primes the pump, so to speak, for getting me prepped for those other vehicles in question. But regardless, this model here was a blast. And on top of that, it was free. You could never go wrong with that. Even though I'm not a Braille scale aficionado, having this one in my collection is definitely one that I personally enjoy, and it's a nice, interesting piece to have overall. And this is the perfect point to pivot us into skill level and recommendation. This build here is definitely going to contrast the usual content that I generally post on this channel, where, well, one, they're usually much, much bigger than this one here, but also in terms of complexity. Generally I do these videos and I'm like, yeah, this model here is great for an intermediate to an advanced, but not so much for a beginner. For this one here, that's not the case. This is a quintessential beginner-friendly model. I mean, this is basically like baby's first model. It's that simple to put together. You could be, Ray Charles and throw one of these together, and I think you'll have some pretty good results with it. Another thing that makes this a great beginner-friendly model is not just with the overall simplicity and ludicrous amount of simplicity that this build has, but also the price. These things are under $5, generally speaking, online. It's probably going to cost more to ship the thing than it is going to actually buy it, which is insane. Honestly, I can't think of any other model where that's really the case. So that's another strong point that this thing does have. And if a beginner can tackle one of these models, needless to say, so could anyone else with a pulse. If you're an intermediate or advanced range builder, you could probably, do one of these while making your cup of coffee in the morning. Okay, they're that easy to put together. But unlike some other models out there that are, really, really simple, this one does have some pretty cool detailing to it, and it's actually a pretty representable piece with all things considered. Me personally, when I was a little boy, I actually really dug the AAV7. I always thought they were really, really cool. And I would sneak into my father's wargaming chest where he had little metal ones, and I used to play with those. So this thing here would have been something I would have really, really killed for as a little kid. I really would have enjoyed it. Having said that, am I going to run out and start going into 144? No. I have quite literally bigger fish to fry, but, you know, having one of these in my collection is definitely not something I regret, and, you know, it's definitely something I enjoyed. I had a real fun time doing this one. As, you know, quick of an experience as it was still a pleasant one regardless, and again, just going to be a nice addition to add to my collection. As I mentioned before, there are two versions that I know of this kit. This is the later variant. They do have a earlier one, and is this something that I would be willing to add to my collection? I'm not going to lie, I'm open to it. I'm definitely open to it, specifically since I have one. I might as well, I got that itch now to, you know, track down the other just so I can round off the collection. But, you know, this is definitely not something I'm going to be going out of my way, you know, in searching of. But, hey, if anyone wants to send me a free one, like this one here, I'll take it. And that goes without saying for any model kit, really. If you have a model kit or a project's not doing anything or collecting dust and, you know, you want to get rid of it, hey, you know, hit me up. I'll definitely take it and, you know, finish it up and make a cool YouTube video like I did here. Wow, that was fast. And at this point, I think we trespassed into recommendation territory. So, on that note, for recommendations, well, if anyone's into Braille scale, 144 scale kits, boom, this kit here is definitely recommended for you. 144 is a legit scale. There are quite a people out there that like working in smaller scale. I've seen a lot of pre-built models offered in this particular scale, and if that's you, again, this kit would be a definite nice addition to add to your collection. If anyone is also a fan of just U.S. Marine Corps military vehicles or just U.S. military vehicles in general, this kit again is also one that, you know, would definitely help to check out. If you're just an avid fan of the Amtrac, oh yeah, this kit here cannot be recommended enough to add to your collection. If you have the 135th scale ones from Tamiya or the newer release ones from Hobby Boss, or even the Trumpeter 135th scale counterparts, the addition of this 144 scale one here would be a nice, interesting conversation piece and also a nice little collection rounder in that type of collection as well. Because of this vehicle's small scale, this actually opens up two other categories for it. First would be dioramas, although that's generally the case for basically everything. But for this smaller scale model over here, it does have some advantages. 144 is a common scale for not just airplanes, but also naval vessels. And with this vehicle being amphibious, this definitely opens up some interesting aspects to make a diorama setting. You could have this thing with a submarine or a PT boat or, you know, something along those lines, which would be pretty cool. And again, you could also work in an airplane or something into that type of configuration. Another aspect that this kit is completely recommended for, and is a legit one, is wargaming. This is something I've touched upon on a few other, you know, smaller scale models in the past, but this one here, it definitely holds more true than those other ones. The 144 scale is a wargaming scale, and this thing here being as affordable as it is definitely something a wargamer would greatly appreciate. With not a whole lot of money, you can have a vast number of these things at your disposal to, you know, throw at your enemies and outsmart them with flanking maneuvers and all sorts of stuff that they did with wargaming. This model here is definitely a fantastic choice for that. Really, really abundant, very, very affordable, and super easy to build, let alone paint. Not much more you want for a wargaming piece than all of those attributes. The last person I would recommend this kit to is anyone who's just looking for something quick and simple, right? Carefree, quick and simple build. There are some people out there that want the opposite, where they want something that's really complex, very elaborate, a ton of parts on it, very detailed, you know, something they can pace themselves with and, you know, take a month or so putting together and painting and all that good stuff. And that's awesome. But there's also people who are on the flip side that they don't want to deal with any of that crap. They just want something simple, super easy. They can put together, you know, they have a busy schedule. They don't have a whole lot of time to spare. If that's you, one of these kits over here really can't be recommended enough. And with that, that wraps up this model showcase video for this 144 at scale U.S. Marine Corps AAVP7. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being smaller scale builds like this one over here, or the other larger scale model showcase videos and project update videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detailed components. Thanks again. I'll be catching you all again on the next one. See you there.